What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Scouting the Fins right here on the 3 Yards Per Carry Podcast Network, also part of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. I'm your co-host, Hussam Patel, and joining me today is our amazing co-host, Coach Eric. Coach, how are we doing?
Hey, doing well. Been a little bit since we talked to Sam, but lots of stuff to get through these next couple of weeks over these prospects that we need to talk about, and obviously excited to talk about the one we're going to look at today because it's offensive line talk, and I'm always here for that.
Yeah, throughout these next several weeks leading up to rookie mini camp, we'll be talking about the Miami Dolphins draft prospects, the 13 NFL draft prospects, and some UDFAs as well. Today's show is just going to be about Miami Dolphins' very first round pick in Kadyn Proctor because, frankly, both of us have a lot to talk about Kadyn Proctor, from our opinion to our feelings to the film that we've watched and some of that advanced statistical research we've done. But before we get into what Kadyn Proctor does on the field, Coach, we need to understand his journey into the Miami Dolphins, very first round draft pick as part of the Jeff Hafley and John Eric Sullivan era. He was the consensus number one offensive tackle recruit in the 2023 class in Iowa. And he committed to the University of Iowa with Kirk Ferentz, home state, Iowa A, the Iowa way, and then on National Signing Day, he flips to Alabama to be the starting left tackle as a true freshman under head coach Nick Saban.
Yeah, and those are two great states when you're talking about offensive linemen, Iowa, Alabama, and totally get why he would do that. As a kid going to the college level that clearly had pro aspirations from the very beginning. As good as Iowa is, right? I could see the national stage that you're going to get at Alabama playing against those SEC edges week in and week out. And I do feel that better prepared him for the NFL, especially as a tackle at some point, hopefully, than maybe he would have been in the Big Ten. So really like that. Almost saw him go to Iowa again after his freshman year when Nick Saban left Alabama. Proctor actually did transfer to Iowa and spent like 3 months there before going back to Alabama. And that was before even spring practices had kicked up. So he never really played football for Iowa, but there was a short stint there where he was enrolled at Iowa before returning and finishing those next 2 years at Alabama as well.
Yep. And, and then, Nick Saban retired. You said, he went back to Iowa, then transferred back to Alabama. He didn't leave because of Nick Saban. He more so left because of the uncertainty and came back and
Mhm.
trusted the process at Alabama under Kalen DeBoer. And I think that decision to return pretty much defined his 2025 season. Playing through a torn labrum in 2024, very nagging injuries in 2025. He didn't get shut down. Uh, and the thing was, he didn't really preserve his draft stock. He didn't sit out any games. He continued to play and play and play. He earned, first team All SEC honors, co won the Jacobs blocking trophy, which is the best offensive lineman in the SEC. And then draft night, Nick Saban comes out publicly and says that he's not a self starter, right? And pretty much, to quote, he said, and I had asked him at the press conference when he first got drafted. Nick Saban pretty much said that when he's not in the building, he might not be in the best shape. He's not a self starter. And if Nick Saban says that about a player, that can be very publicly damaging. He's a Hall of Fame, college football coach. And we'll get into Kadyn Proctor's direct response to that, but let's go ahead and set the table just based upon his film, Coach. I mean, every person we've talked to, and from your film review and other people's film review in the Dolphins draft community, his 2025 tape was probably his best football he had in his 2 years at Alabama. The trajectory, is going up and up. And the kid's only, 20, turning 21 soon. Uh, the self started question is real, but playing through a torn labrum, coming back to Alabama after the uncertainty with Saban leaving. Now it's more so about how John Eric Sullivan and Jeff Hafley deal with that daily. Can they manage his weight? Can he be thrusted into the starting lineup, which we'll get into a little bit later? And if he can maintain that same play he had at Alabama. But look, the tape answers more than Coach Nick Saban's words do.
Yeah, and I think there was a lot of layers to that. I mean, one is that Saban only had him for the one season there at Alabama, so he knew him as a 18-year-old kid. Um, and like you said, he still is only 20 years old, so there is still maturity to go there. And when you're in the NFL right now, you're in the building almost all the time, right? So if you're saying that when he's in the building, he's there, as a professional athlete, you spend more time in the building. Hopefully, that's a good sign for him. Hopefully, the maturity is there. When you asked him that question, I think you talked about how he feels more comfortable at his current weight, that 350-pound range. And again, right, this is a young kid that's still trying to figure out his body in a sense, right? So for now, if he's saying that he's realizing that the weight that he's at, he can feel the difference and he doesn't want to go back to it, then I'm going to trust the kid for now. All the signs for him have been that, he's a good kid, a hard worker. I've talked before about the stuff that they gave him in addition to playing tackle at Alabama. Like, you don't do that for somebody that's not motivated, not putting the work in, not doing that type of stuff. So I feel like every sign points to him being a good person, right? And I expect him to work hard. In terms of the on-field stuff, agree that his 2025 tape was the best that he has put out so far. I think that you can really see the vision of him, right? And I don't. They already talked about him playing guard at least to start. I think that's a good choice for him because I think that some of the issues that still exist on tape are things that can be covered up in a sense when you move him into guard. But then hopefully, as he continues to develop physically, that he can eventually move back out to tackle. But there's a lot of stuff to like about him on tape in terms of his athletic ability, in terms of being able to move guys at the point of attack, his ability to get out in space. Like, there's a lot of things to like on tape while still being able to see the ceiling that he hasn't reached yet. And that's something that John Eric Sullivan has talked about, is that they want to draft players whose best football is ahead of them. And I think that Kadyn Proctor kind of fits squarely into that conversation as, yes, he's a good player now. He is a first round NFL pick today, but there's still more meat on the bone if this kid can get there.
Yeah. 32 and a half vertical at 352 pounds, set a combine record for players over 350 pounds. He cleared it by over 2 full inches. Athleticism score throughout the charts, 98th percentile, was it a 9.21 or a 9.76 relative athletic score? His weight at 352 was 98th percentile for offensive tackles. 6'7". His squat was at 815 pounds. I mean, let's go ahead and start with the most important thing on tape, coach, because it's the very first thing that any coach, and especially you as an offensive line coach, sees: the anchor. I mean, his archetype as the offensive tackle in this class that we talked about during, our shows pre-draft, his archetype was the anchor that can really hold the left side of the offensive line at left tackle. But in Miami, he'll more so be a guard.
Yeah, and I think, I don't want to sit here and make a direct comparison to Jonas Avayanaya, but when you look at how Jonas struggled as a rookie and you go back and look at some of the college film with him as well, there were signs in a sense. And I thought that moving Jonah inside would cover some of that up, but he did have trouble with power when he was out there in space, and that ended up, affecting him as a guard also. But when you look at Kadyn Proctor, then you don't have that, right? That anchor is always there, right? Whether it's taking on somebody directly or, if you're getting Proctor on the move and then they're trying to go speed to power, you can see that he's able to use his mass to really anchor down there. You can see that, there's still development to go with his hands. He's still working through different techniques, but there's enough there that you can be optimistic in the improvement from the technical standpoint of it as well. You don't see him losing in the same ways over and over again. But yeah, the anchor is impressive, and that's a great starting point, because that's not so much a mental thing or even a physical thing. Like, that can be difficult to teach a player how to anchor. That's a lot of times more of a mentality and just kind of a feel thing. And Proctor really does have that and provides a nice base to work from for the rest of the stuff.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for Kadyn Proctor, which I saw, was the Georgia game in 2025. Um, Ty Simpson is in the pocket with Kadyn Proctor at left tackle. The edge rusher fires a bull rush on the snap. No counter, no spin. A little bit similar to this play right here, which we're showing if you're watching this on YouTube. No counter, no spin, just straight up pure power, and the set is clean. Where Kadyn Proctor is just straight up vertical square. His hips are loaded. They're already synced already to absorb the power, absorb the contact. And the defender hits him in the chest. You can see it's a stun and a twist coming through. And he picks it up as well, just like that, in a snap second. And no one is able to get passed by him. And the thing is, he barely even shifts his weight right here. And the defender tries to basically disengage and try to swat the ball, and that doesn't happen. And that pocket was huge that we just saw there earlier, Coach, for Ty Simpson.
Yeah, and that, when you talk about when he gets a hold of the defender, that he's not collapsing the pocket, like, that's something we see on the other side of the Dolphins line as well, or at least, well, on the same side as where Proctor's going to play, on the left side. You see that with Patrick Paul also, that once he gets those big old mitts on you, like, it's over. And that's kind of the same with Proctor. Like, where he can struggle at times is when he gets in space and he's not able to get his hands on a defender. But when he is able to get his hands on the defender, he's either able to anchor down, absorb the power rush, or once he has his hands on him, you're not going to see him able to get a lot of those counter moves and getting away from him. And you see that with Patrick Paul as well. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that develops, right? With, especially if he does end up staying on the left side with Patrick Paul for his rookie season, seeing those two work together and having that left side of the pocket be that firm is going to be something that we haven't seen in Miami for a while.
Yeah. And I think the best thing for Kadyn Proctor is definitely going to be the run game, where he's just overwhelming. Okay. It's not more so of his technique, it's just of his size and his sheer power. I mean, I read a quote earlier that said that, he's a vicious drive blocker with plus grip strength, low pad level. You mentioned once he gets his mitt on you, like Patrick Paul, you're done. I feel like he was the best fit on gap concepts, on duo, power, pin and pull that we saw in the McDaniel offense those last 2 years, but used very sparingly. Under Bobby Slowick, it's more so zone, it's wide. The running back is looking to go horizontal rather than straight up through the gap to get away from the defenders. And when he had Tyler Booker on his right side in 2024, Coach, those dual runs routinely drove those three techniques who were over 320 pounds 4 or 5 yards off the line of scrimmage. I mean, 4 or 5 yards per carry just on the left side, and Devon Achane potentially not being touched off the line. That's really big movement if that can happen with Patrick Paul and Kadyn Proctor.
Yeah, and that's where that massive vertical jump shows up. That, the vertical jump is the vertical and the broad translate nicely to that short area explosion, and that's where you see it show up in the run game, is just his ability to get off the ball and move defenders against their will. And he, shows a really good understanding of those combination blocks that you'll see on the inside zone and duo runs as well. So there's that a lot of that is a feel thing again, right? And he has that sense of how long to stay on that double team before moving off to the linebacker, or at times realizing that you have to stay on there. I think he does a really good job with that. Um, Also see him in the pin and pull. He talked about that being one of the things that he likes, and does a really good job with especially the pin side of it, of taking as a tackle, you're taking that three technique or that 4-eye and pinning him to the inside so that your guard can loop around. And he just does a really good job of that as well. And then you talk about the outside zone stuff, and Alabama did not run a lot of that in 2025, but going through and watching every snap that he had in 2025, when they did run it, you can see the flashes there. You can see the athleticism showing up, because in the Shanahan style outside zone schemes, they're really trying to run off the ball, and that's where his athleticism does show up. And there's going to be some growing pains there, both from a scheme and learning it a little better, and the position change with him. But there is definitely a potential there for him to be a plus level outside zone blocker.
Yeah, let's take a look at this play real quick, Coach, up against Vanderbilt, and more so of a tight set with the quarterback's back to the opposing goal line right here. On the left side of the line, you have Proctor at left tackle. You have the tight end in line right next to him. You have the wide receiver just in between the tight end and Kadyn Proctor. You see how he's able to get his right shoulder up onto the defensive lineman, right onto his right. He's able to push him up, combo block with number 71, then really unlatch himself, work his way to the second level on number 22, the Vanderbilt linebacker. And look where this hole is already. Like, for example, you're doing a combo block. If Patrick Paul and Kadyn Proctor are doing a combo block on the left side, Patrick Paul is going to be the one climbing up, while Kadyn Proctor is going to be this guy, number 71. Just really, like, you can see he's able to climb up with a little bit of space right after he latches on. If there's no defensive lineman in the middle, Aaron Brewer is shooting up to this next linebacker. Proctor can detach right here and continue to follow Devon Achane right up through the hole.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I really liked about that rep was that you can see, if you watch Proctor's head, you can see that even while he is engaging in that combo block, that his eyes are on that linebacker. So he is, you know, working, feeling that defensive tackle, but then as he's seeing that linebacker scraping over top right now, understands where the leverage is both for the guard and himself on that linebacker, and just sliding off and making it an easy block. And then from there, right, that's where you get somebody like Devon Achane, who has great vision, that just sees the leverage that those linemen have, and then you get him into the second level or the third level, one-on-one with the safety between him and the end zone.
Yeah. I think his 2025 improvement arc is the most important counter to every concerned coach. There were a lot of people who dismissed him after his week one performance against Vanderbilt, this game that we have up on the screen if you're watching on YouTube right here. He allowed 5 pressures in that game. And then mid-season, a completely different player. His pass protection improved and got better directly with his weight. And he mentioned he lost just a little bit of more weight and gained more muscle mass throughout the season in 2025. When he got below 360 pounds, his technique cleaned up. He was able to move much better, and he was able to move much faster. I think Miami's first priority in training camp is making sure he hovers and stays around that 350-pound area.
Yeah, that first game against Florida State, a lot of people referenced it, and I think that was on a
Florida State,
national
I'm
stage.
sorry, yeah.
Yeah. No, but it's the same idea, right? It was the first game of the season. It was on a national stage, right? Very visible and kind of stuck with everybody for the rest of the year. And I think that people kind of let that game be their determining factor for him throughout the season. But even he talked about after that game that some of his old teammates called him and they're like, "Hey man, you look slow." Like, and that's, conditioning, confidence, all of that stuff. But like you said, you could see that after that game, you could see the upward progression. And then when you get to that Georgia game in the playoffs, he was nearly flawless in that game, right? But that's kind of the nature of being an offensive lineman. Week one, you struggle, you're giving up pressures and sacks. Everybody sees that. Everybody's going to talk about that. But then you get into a much more important game in a playoff game and you are flawless. So nobody talks about you, right? But people don't remember the games where nobody talks about you. But when you go back and you watch it, you can see that progression throughout the season.
All right. Um, do you think his arm length is a bit shorter than expected for his frame? And was there any concern up against speed rushers? Like, for example, up against Oklahoma's Mason Thomas. He had some clean sets against him, but then Mason Thomas had a little bit of an inside counter. He came super fast. It was a quick inside jab through there with a swim move. He tries to reach for him with his inside hand and misses just by an inch because his arm length is just 30 and 5/8 of an inch instead of the usual 31, 32 inches.
Yeah, I don't think that I wouldn't put that on the arm length. I think that that's stuff that if you clean up the feet a little more on the edge, that you're going, that makes up for more than having half an inch or an inch with the arms. Um, when I did my film review video for Kadyn Proctor, that was one of the sections that I had in there was when, especially in space, as players were working up field and then countering back to the inside, that too often they were able to get there too cleanly. But that was more of uh, a foot speed, a balance type deal than it was not having a little bit of extra reach. The big place where the arm length shows up for me is more so in the run game, especially with the outside zone stuff, because I think it gives you a little more ability to control that defender once you latch on. But I don't like it's not a debilitating factor for me. It just becomes, especially if he really hits the ground running as a guard, right? And really takes off. Like, are you better off leaving him at guard long term where the arm length is never going to be a question, right? You could be an all pro with those arms as a guard, but it's rare that you see a Pro Bowl or all pro tackle with the shorter arms, right? So then it comes down to the decision, do you want to be a above average tackle or do you want to be a all pro guard? And I think that could be where the arm length discussion comes in. But I think that more importantly than the arm length, if you want to move him out to tackle, I think you got to see some improvement in the lower half.
All right, Coach, we've reached the midway point of our show here. We'll go ahead and head to break. All right, and we're back. Coach, we talked a lot about Kadyn Proctor's strengths and a little bit about his weaknesses. One more thing I wanted to touch on. You mentioned his zone blocking, just a second level tracking, and then potentially, just those. I feel like some of the play side reach blocks up against much faster and physical defensive ends coming from left to right. He could stand to get a little bit more outside, but you mentioned he'll more so be a left guard in Miami, right? So he'll be able to get there a little bit quicker, a little bit faster. So that concern is a little bit minimized. And I feel like it'll allow him to grow into the zone blocking scheme more compared to what we saw at Alabama.
Yeah, I agree. Like that the main issues that I see show up for Kadyn Proctor are when he has to be in space, right? Whether that's getting out on a screen pass, whether that's trying to block a defender. Like he does a decent job disengaging at the second level, but as you find him in more space, he has more trouble latching on. Whereas when you move him into guard, you're kind of putting bumpers on, right? Because if he's at left guard and you're running wide zone to the left, right, that defensive tackle, defensive end, whatever he is pursuing, can't get any further outside than what Patrick Paul is. So you can be a little more decisive, a little more aggressive getting after that. Whereas if you are out at tackle, then you have to really worry about the space that he can work with. So yeah, I think that when you look at where Proctor has to improve and how you kind of fast track that improvement, right? If you want to build his confidence, then you move him inside where he's got the bumpers and he can really learn those techniques. And then again, right, hopefully someday he can move out to tackle. But for now, right, having him not have to worry as much about trying to catch a defender in space should be a nice confidence boost as he continues to mature mentally.
All right. So when Kadyn Proctor actually starts at left guard, a lot of the concerns we talked about gets a little bit reduced, right? At guard, the reps, the distances are shorter, right? The the pin and pull types of runs more so fit his movement profile, where he's not asked to move at a much longer length, at a much faster pace. And his anchor is, I would say, probably one of the better anchors in the NFL, especially at the guard position. What the offensive line could potentially look like overall, and we know what's confirmed on the left side is obviously Patrick Paul at left tackle, Kadyn Proctor at left guard, Aaron Brewer at center. We know that is set. We don't know what the right side could look like. Could Austin Jackson have some competition? Could Jonas Avanaya get better in his sophomore year? Or Jamari Salyer maybe makes a start at right guard? There's going to be some cross training for Kadyn Proctor at left tackle, at right tackle, at left guard, at right guard. Just the tackle door is not closed yet on day one. And there's a little bit of a parallel, right, Coach, with Laramie Tunsil. Now, we're not necessarily saying that Kadyn Proctor is like Laramie Tunsil. The action of him playing at guard, then potentially moving to tackle, is like Laramie Tunsil. If we allow Kadyn Proctor to develop, to become one of the better guards in the game, and then maybe later on move to tackle, that can happen. That's exactly what happened with Zach Tom from Green Bay. He was a guard, then switched to center, and now he's the right tackle in Green Bay. And that's going to be, I think, the same model for Kadyn Proctor. A tackle conversion from a position of strength where the Dolphins roster allows it can help to maximize his development.
Yeah, I think the Zach Tom comparison is probably more applicable than the Laramie Tunsil one.
Yeah.
Tunsil definitely did go guard to tackle, but the only reason that Tunsil was a guard was because of Brandon Albert being at left tackle there.
Yeah.
That for one season, you always knew that year two that Laramie Tunsil was going left tackle, no questions asked. There are still, I guess, some questions about what the long term plan is for Kadyn Proctor. We know that he's, or even, they didn't necessarily declare him as the starter at left guard. That's just where he is going to begin his training, right? But they did talk about the cross training. You talked about the offensive line as a whole. I really think that they are hoping that Jonah can develop as the right guard and that Austin Jackson can stay healthy as the right tackle. And then that's kind of, across the board, a pretty young, athletic, capable group if Jonah steps up, right? But if Jonah can't make that next step, if Austin Jackson can't stay healthy, then you're going to see some changes. You also know that Jamari Salyer was told that he's going to have the opportunity to compete for a starting position. So there could still be some movement. It does, but it does seem likely that Proctor is staying at left guard and the right side needs to be figured out. I think the right side will be Austin Jackson as long as he's healthy. And then it comes down to what happens between Jonah and Salyer, in my opinion. Now, where things could get really interesting is if Austin Jackson does get injured again, right? What do you do at that point? Do you ask Kadyn Proctor to move mid-season? Like that worries me a bit if he's going to train on the left side and then try to make that move mid-season. Do you suck it up and let him play left guard for the entire season and then look at next year to move him? Just a lot of stuff like that. So it'll be very interesting to see what it looks like. And even getting into the preseason, right? If they're talking about cross training him, does he start preseason uh, preseason game one, snap one at left guard, but then as the reserves get in, does he get an opportunity to play some other positions as well to get game experiences? Like that's one of the things that I'm looking forward to with Kadyn Proctor, like to see whether or not they're saying, yeah, you're the left guard, we're going to let you get comfortable there, or are they, truly going to start preparing him for the future from the beginning?
Do you feel like if he's cross training and playing in multiple positions in year one, it kind of caps his ceiling where he's not able to really find his footing, especially in that worst case scenario where he plays left guard. Okay, Austin Jackson is out. They move him to right tackle. Okay, Jonas Avenaya can't get it done. You move him to right guard instead. You put Jamari Salyer as a right tackle. Or God forbid something happens to Patrick Paul and you put him as a starter on the left side. Um, I feel like the best course of action would just put him at one spot and let him play rather than just move him around.
Yeah, I agree completely. And that's, if I was making the decisions and my long term vision was to have him at right tackle, I would probably start him at right guard so that that transition next year is a little bit smoother. But I do get the idea of, he's more natural for now on the left side. So let him stay on the left side and then slowly introduce him to the right side. And I guess if you're going with that direction, then I don't see any issues with him transitioning to from left tackle to left guard. That's a very simple transition. And if slowly cross train, slowly introduce him to the right side, then you have a better chance to see, hey, this isn't working out, right? We're just going to have to live with him at left guard and figure out the right side some other way, as opposed to throwing him into the fire on the right side and then having two positions or three positions that are downgraded as a result of that, right? It makes you wonder. Like I'm not completely sold that the left versus the right side makes a huge difference for Jonah in the grand scheme of things, because I think the issues that he showed existed on both sides, even though the left side he only played tackle. But would you have been better off starting him on the right side and then slowly introducing him to the left side to be able to see, right? It really felt like last year they kind of decided from day one, hey, Jonah is the starting left guard, and they just rode that till the wheels fell off, essentially. Whereas giving Kadyn Proctor the opportunity to start his NFL career, at least from a practice perspective on the left side, gives them a little more room for error in that sense. Like I said, if you start him on the left side and you start giving him 25% of snaps on the right side just to see how he's doing, and it is just a complete disaster, then you just leave him on the left side. And that's the end of it. You don't go through the same pains that we had with Jonah.
Um, all right, moving on to some of the press conference questions he asked her. Obviously, the big one about the weight. We talked about it over and over again. But John Eric Sullivan says something important about that weight question on the Joe Rowe show where he did his interview. And he said, he sat on my couch, had a lot of conversations, and didn't hide from any of it. And it was more so conviction on the things that he needed to be honest about to be the best football player he could be during his 30 visit. He said he's not worried about the weight. He did the work. They had the direct conversation. It's more so about the conviction. I think John Eric Sullivan likes the conviction. He drafted based on conviction. Same with Jeff Hafley, where they signed players based on conviction too. So, Coach, if that's the exact answer you're looking for from a rookie at pick 12, he said, yeah, it was a thing. And he didn't deflect on it. He didn't get defensive. He said it was accurate, but he didn't really fully answer the question. Do you think it was, do you have some concerns about that answer? Was that, a little bit too scary for you, or was that, just right what he said?
No, I didn't have any issues with the answer. Again, this is a 20-year-old kid, right? Like he's still learning how stuff works, like what works for him. And so I would be more concerned if he was still 400 pounds and trying to figure it out, right? But he was very straightforward about finding a workout that he actually liked. Like he doesn't want to go run on a track or run in a treadmill and run 5 miles a day or whatever. Like he found this, what was it, Hot Works or whatever it was called, where you're working in a inflated temperature environment and you sweat a lot quicker, you burn it off a lot quicker, the workouts are shorter. So and that's a big thing. Like you gotta, anytime that you're trying to lose weight, to get in shape, you got to find something that you like to do, right? So if John Eric Sullivan was convinced that Kadyn Proctor was being truthful, that hey, I've found this type of workout to manage my weight that I like, then I would tend to believe a kid that is 20 years old versus, like, if we were having this conversation at you know 26, 27 years old. It's like, what took you so long to find what you like to do in terms of working out? Like, it's not, doesn't seem like an unrealistic time frame for a kid that went to college at 17 years old and had no idea how to manage his weight to now at 20 be learning how to do that properly. So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say it's not a concern at all, right? But I could see where he's telling you that he's figuring this out. He's telling you that he's realizing that his body feels much better at this weight, that based on where that ceiling is, then I fully understand why you would take that risk and give him that opportunity. And again, like, the even if he were to balloon up to 380 pounds, like, he's still going to be a pretty good guard, in my opinion, right? The weight thing more comes if you want to see him reach that ceiling as a Pro Bowl, all pro guard, or be able to move out to tackle. That's where the weight conversation comes in. He is a good enough, like, I don't want to dismiss the weight, right? But even at 380, like, you watch the early season games and he can still move. Like, it's not like he gets up to 380 and he's suddenly a slug and can't move and things like that. He's still athletic. Obviously, long term, keep the weight down, be able to do more stuff. But I don't think that the weight will prevent him from being a good NFL player regardless.
All right, one more thing about his weight, just not his weight, I'm sorry, just about his play. It's going to be more so about the play action setup that Bobby Slowick is going to run with Malik Willis at quarterback. And the structure pretty much requires the run game to be a genuine threat before the fake works. And if defenses don't respect the zone runs that are coming through the left side, with Patrick Paul and, let's say, for example, Kadyn Proctor struggles a little bit, they can't necessarily exploit the play action conversions. And based on his Alabama tape, he can move those interior defenders. We didn't see a lot of his play at left guard, so we have no idea what he necessarily could look like. But when Devon Achane's outside zone is available and running and linebackers can't teach the run, that play action is going to be at full efficiency. When you saw those play action passes on tape, coach, up against Vanderbilt, up against Georgia, some of the pin and pull actions that were fake runs but play action passes, can he hold up against those bigger, stronger three techs and maybe even potentially edge rushers that are stunting, looping in with free releases?
Yeah, I think so, and I think that that kind of plays to his strengths. Especially as you eventually move him back out to tackle, right? When you're going play action, you're making the defender be indecisive. They still have to play run responsibilities to an extent. So that gives Proctor that extra fraction of a second to get engaged. And we've already talked about that once he's engaged, he's very difficult to get away from. So I do think that, running those play action concepts will help Proctor in pass protection. I think that, we talk about his combo blocks, his doubles, his ability to pin the defender inside, even his ability to pull outside and lead sometimes. Like, that's always going to give the defense something to think about when you're looking at as a, whether it's a three technique, a two technique, a 2Y, like somebody in that guard area, right? You can't sell out versus the pass when you have somebody that's 350 pounds in front of you, because if you do, then Proctor's just going to wash you out completely. Whereas, if now you're kind of playing in between, now Proctor's got the ability to get his hands on you, going to lock you up, and there's not a whole lot you can do. So I do think the pass or the play action will be a benefit for Proctor, because I do think we're going to get the movement in the run game, and I think that little extra fraction of a half second or whatever will benefit Proctor when it comes to pass protection.
Kadyn Proctor, Tyler Booker, J.C. Latham, Evan Neal. The Alabama offensive line track record at the NFL level is kind of complicated, Coach. Those are all massive guys who struggled very, very early on. Um, I think Kadyn Proctor may struggle very, very early on. Hopefully, he only struggles for a couple of games and then is back to what he looked like at Alabama. Evan Neal struggled his first 2 seasons and bounced back a little bit. Then he got injured. J.C. Latham struggled outside at tackle. Then the Titans moved him to guard. Tyler Booker was a right guard through and through. He got drafted by the Cowboys to play guard and did decently to above average at guard in his normal space. How much does that history of these Alabama offensive linemen uh, does it live in your head, and can you separate just the comp and what the projection of Kadyn Proctor could be early on?
So, well, like you said, Tyler Booker, I think, is kind of a separate conversation, because I do think that he had a pretty good season last year. But overall, I think that Kadyn Proctor is, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I feel like he is a more athletic player than the other guys that you listed. But also, when you look at guys like Latham, Evan Neal, like, they had to start at tackle and they failed at tackle, whereas the Dolphins seem ready to allow Proctor to play guard and hopefully succeed at guard before trying him at tackle. So, it's not quite an apples to apples comparison, but it's it's not something you can ignore, the history of those Alabama offensive linemen. It goes even further back. I'm drawing a blank on some of the names off the top of my head, but you you see it over and over again, and you do have to hope that Kadyn Proctor kind of breaks that mold. But I do hope that the strategy that the Dolphins have of taking a player that is enough to be a tackle, but letting him learn the NFL ropes at guard has long term, benefits.
I think here's my read on Proctor, and it becomes a legitimate bet if three things do come true. The first one, obviously, he shows up to training camp, 350, hovers around 350. The zone blocking technique throughout rookie minicamp to the camp from July to September improves measurably. He learns the playbook down. He does well in preseason, where you feel very, very comfortable with him as a starter at left guard. Then number three, the pass protection development in just year one matches the trajectory of improvement he had in 2025 from FSU to Vanderbilt to Georgia to the playoff game up against Georgia. If all three happen and come true in this very first season, Miami has their franchise left guard. They already have their franchise left tackle and Patrick Paul. That left side will be anchored for a good part of 7, 8, hopefully a decade for this team. Okay. But if the weight creeps up, his pass protection doesn't improve, he can't really do well in zone blocking that much at a higher rep capacity compared to Alabama, then some questions could start to arise if John Eric Sullivan and Jeff Hafley made the right bet for the build. Because guess what? They traded back. They received a little bit more capital for 2 extra picks. Now, look, the concerns, we're not going to dismiss them. We talked about them. They're real. They can be coachable. But if this is a player worth pick number 12, this is a defining move of John Eric Sullivan and Jeff Hafley's first draft.
Oh, absolutely. Whatever your first pick is as a new front office, a new head coach, like that's going to be kind of a player that you have to hang your hat on, right? If this turns out to be a complete flop, it's a black eye on everybody involved. For me, the two biggest things as we get into camp, one, the conditioning, right? I'm not as concerned about the weight, whether it's 345, 360, whatever, right? And we're not going to be able to see it every day, right? But hopefully some of the beat reporters will be able to talk about it some, like, is he able to finish practice at the same speed that everybody else is, right? Or is he, over there sucking down fluids while the first team offense is in, right? So the conditioning part of it, and if you are well conditioned, probably the weight's going to be under control as well. So those are linked together. And then the other thing is just going to be, can they settle him into a spot, right? And I don't think it matters for me whether it's left guard, right guard. I don't think he's ready for right tackle yet, but I don't want to see him. 1 week he's a left guard, next week he's the right guard,
You don't
and
want
flip
him to
flop.
be the next Liam Eichenberg, pretty
Don't.
much. I mean, he got the Liam Eichenberg number of 74. You just better hope he doesn't turn out to be a Liam Eichenberg.
I can say confidently that the floor for Kadyn Proctor, I feel, is still significantly higher than what we experienced with Liam Eichenberg over the last 5 years.
Well, we can end that on a positive note, and we'll see what Kadyn Proctor looks like. Next episode, we'll talk about Chris Johnson, Jacob Rodriguez, and the remaining of the Miami Dolphins pick on this post-draft series of Scouting the Fins. Stick with us here on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Scouting the Fins, part of the 3 Yards Per Carry podcast. Coach, thank you so much, and as always,
Thank you.